create an A list, a B list, and a C list of like types of investors. And you want to put the strategic investors at the like in the A part.
This is Working Lab number 11, Smart Capital.
Welcome, everyone.
Hi, welcome.
So today we're going to be talking about smart capital. As you know, we have working labs on different topics that we like to put online and share a little bit of our insights and knowledge. Do you want to talk about the logistics of it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, Working Labs, this is our first YouTube one. We're super excited about that. We initially had them on Instagram Live and LinkedIn Live. And really, the most important thing to know is we get to share some of our knowledge and answer some questions that we get from our community. So a lot of these topics are drawn directly from you guys, and of course, open to many more and to see and learn. But today's topic, as we said, is smart capital. Maybe initially we should just set the tone and you can tell us a little bit about what smart capital is.
Yeah. So smart capital is a term that is used to describe investors that are not only providing money, meaning a financial check when they invest in a company, but also added value. So usually they would provide, a little bit of their network, maybe some skills, even if they have an expertise. And just make sure that their money goes a long way in a sense. So that's what's called smart capital. I think there's other terms that have been used. We talk a lot about strategic investment because that's, part of the strategy. If you can help as an investor, it's usually a win-win, obviously.
Totally.
And there's other terms as well, but this is what we're going to be basically talking about.
Agreed. Or like value-add investors as well. Actually, so just a question, just to clarify, is smart capital only in reference to venture capital?
No. I mean, it can be for any type of investments and asset classes. It's well known in venture capital because this is usually where companies actually need the most support. And this is also where investors actually are more involved usually, just because, they're taking a little bit of more risks. So they want to be more involved in, how the company is going and growing. And usually this is a time early stage in a company's life cycle where the most support you can get, the better. So the effect of the value add is maximized in a sense.
Totally. Totally. It makes a big difference.
Yeah. So another question that we have, and we kind of touched upon that a little bit, but usually, there's a question of like, where do you find smart capital? And specifically, maybe we can start with why and when should you, look for smart capital?
I mean, if we take the journey of the entrepreneur, there's the saying that the journey of the road of the entrepreneur is a long and solo one. And there's a lot of truth in that, even less so when it's co-founders versus a single founder. But essentially, I like to say that your investors should be your biggest cheerleaders. I mean, we're investors ourselves, and, we know what it's like to support a lot of our companies. We know what it's like to add value and to be as strategic as possible. If you can go that route, always do so, especially at an earlier stage. I think maybe not at your first stage when you're trying to bootstrap or like raising from friends and family, you're just trying to get a bit of cash in. But the next rounds, your seed, your A, and so forth, you want really strategic support and help. And so you want to be very selective about who you bring on your cap table.
One thing is important to know, and maybe I'll turn the question to you and I can also answer whenever. What do you think, like, where do you think people should look for smart capital? Like, where do you find smart capital?
I mean, I guess it's about doing a lot of research, and like kind of going in and distilling your list of networks. Like we always like to say, when you're fundraising, create an A list, a B list, and a C list of like types of investors. And, you want to put the strategic investors at the, like in the A part. Where do you find them? Honestly, it's like by asking around, doing research, finding like funds and investors that have good reputations in the field, finding like other founders that have similar, like, that are in a similar sector and that have had support. I think sometimes that's really important. Like even for us, like a lot of introductions come from our founders. So you kind of want the same in reverse when you're a founder. You want introductions from your founder friends through to investors.
Yeah, I think that's right. the introduction part is so important, right? Because this is how you get the good investors, because you have the reference and you can get a direct kind of connection with them. So I think that's very important. Yeah, going to conferences and events, and even just reaching out on LinkedIn sometimes if you do your research as you mentioned, and you find investors that seem really interesting, just reaching out and seeing if you can get meetings. But in any case, the earlier the better. That's usually what we say. Building this relationship as early as possible.
Oh, totally.
Mhm.
Like you want to build the relationships when you're not fundraising,
Yeah.
and I know this talk isn't about fundraising, but the same applies for any kind of
Yeah.
smart capital, right? Like that.
Yeah.
It's just build those relationships, identify the key players for you, and then kind of go from there.
100%.
So we're looking at the screen because we got a lot of questions from you guys, so we want to make sure we're tackling those. One of the questions is, how do you define if an investor can come in with smart capital? Like, when you're fundraising, there are questions that you can ask that can help you lead to that. Maybe you can share some of those with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing is you have to remember that it's the meeting with an investor is a two-way street, meaning that you are also, you have the right to ask questions. Like usually investors are going to ask you a million questions because they want to understand what you're working on. And that's kind of like the goal of the meeting, is trying to get them on board. But you can also ask them questions. And so to answer yours, what you want to understand is, first of all, if they can help you, because that's kind of the goal. Smart capital, remember, is an investor that's going to bring not only money, but also support in any form that they can bring it. So, you can ask, how can you help me? You can ask if they're available and how much, how many hours they can maybe provide you with on a monthly basis. Let's say, is that just an email from time to time, or is it I can sit with you for an hour or two every month? I can go for coffee. So availability is a good thing to ask as well. And then just making sure that you're aligned with the investor in general. So not only this is good, you're going to invest money and you're going to bring support, but what does success look like to you as an investor for my company after you've heard everything that I'm building? Does that make sense? Are you on board? Are we looking at the same kind of strategic vision? And that's going to be very important, because obviously if your interests are misaligned, then, the support and the kind of work together is not gonna work out the same way. I mean, there's other. Do you want? I mean, I can go through them. Do you want to add some more?
No, keep. I think it's very clear.
Other question is understanding if they helped other companies before. So if so, what did they do with them? So again, it's interesting to see, what has been the process before, and again, in terms of hours, in terms of content, of format. And then the results maybe that they got from that support. So it's just good for you to, determine if that makes sense for you. And then just generally, what type of network and connections they have, what they can provide. So again, in terms of format and content, is it just going to be you connecting me to other people? Is it you having very specific skills as an investor that actually are going to be super helpful? Is it because they're working in a specific company that you need a partnership with, so they can not only make the connection, but maybe even become the main contact?
Yeah.
Whatever that might be, I think going into these questions and going in depth in terms of what the help can look like, is very important.
And actually, to that point, I was just thinking while you were speaking, so I was a little focused, but
of course.
I was just thinking, is there something as such a thing as too much smart capital?
That's a great question, actually, I think.
And and you made me think a lot. I guess, because, you're saying sometimes you get a network, sometimes you get, the value add with specific strategic support. If it's a biotech company, you have a specific biotech fund that can really help you with the FDA, regulatory pieces and all these things. I would assume not, but at the same time, I don't think you want too many big voices in the room. Yes. And obviously, different amounts of investment means different stakes, means different, board seats, etc. So I think there are different levels, but you want to make sure that your investors' advice isn't butting against each other. And I think sometimes it's harder to find smart capital than not. So I would say maybe no, but I'm curious what you have to say, Soph.
No, I think that's a great question, and you're right. I mean, logically, I would say, no, you never have too much support. But I agree with you. I think it's a matter of understanding if all the investors that are working with you and providing maybe smart capital at the same time, if they're again aligned, so that there's no misunderstanding, or as you said, like it's not counterproductive because one is trying to do something that the other is doing differently, whatever. So that's for sure. And then also, I think setting boundaries from the very beginning during this conversation is going to be important that way, where you as a founder, you can say, okay, this is what I need. I understand you can provide me with this and this and this. I would love that. Other than that, maybe we can do, like it's again, like it's an hour call every month. It's a coffee every 3 weeks, but setting the boundaries so that the investor doesn't maybe intrude too much in the strategy and just the execution on a day to day. Cause we've seen that before where companies have been dealing with investors that are a little bit too involved. And maybe providing advice that makes sense for them as investors, but don't really make sense for the company. And that can become quite difficult to manage.
Maybe talk about positives versus negatives of smart capital.
Yeah, because again, like that's something that you'll need to determine as a founder whenever you're looking for investment, as you mentioned at the beginning, like, is that what you need and what you want? So looking at the positive, obviously this is a lot of support. Very strategic and technical support most of the time if you find the right investors, having the right network at moments in the company's life cycle that are significant is going to make a big change. So that's, just for that, the support might be essential. You want to find smart capital that's also aligned with your values. And that I think is very positive, having people on board that are actually believing in what you're building and sharing your values as an individual even. I think that's extremely positive for, any type of project, but specifically when you're building a startup. And then just having people on board again, that are active and that can provide that sounding board. So think of them as well as, obviously they can provide, again, like technical support or networking, but they can also be these people that you go to and ask for advice and talk about, even more mental health stuff, like well-being. It's getting complicated because I'm the CEO, I'm managing all of these things. Investors usually have had the experience before with other companies or themselves as entrepreneurs before, or whatever their job might be. So think of it as a relationship that can also become quite personal, and that can be very positive. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak, for our experience, but we have a lot of close relationships with a lot of our founders, and it's been really amazing to see. At the same time, there are disagreements that happen internally within teams, and sometimes, I mean, yes, on the board, the board will help with a lot of these decisions, but also I think a lot of it is like you said, it's a sounding board aspect, and it's really nice to be able to have that external kind of like, okay, we're disagreeing. Let's get external opinions from, and there's different series, right? You have advisors, you have investors, and then you have like value add investors. So all these different levels are resources that are available to the founders. And at the end of the day, it's about thinking of the investor not only as like a cash cow, but a lot more,
Yeah.
And I think, like you touched on some of the negatives, but sometimes like the person is a little too involved. If the investors are trying to like tell you how to do certain things. So that can be quite negative. So you'd have to be very careful to try to like set boundaries or mitigate that. Also, I think there's one thing, like smart capital is very like specific and peculiar. And we talked about list A, B, and C, for example, when you're fundraising, but sometimes when you need to fundraise really fast or it's a difficult environment, you kind of just want any capital in, and it's much harder to find smart capital. Though it is it's important to say, like, if there is a sector that investor is specialized in and you are raising specifically from that sector, it's important to note that like actually, you're probably going to go to those people first, and they might be much more interested because they're looking for hyper specific kind of investments.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, smart capital might take a little more time to find, but I think for the positives and like the upsides of it, I think it makes a lot of sense. But as you said, like some situations, sometimes you don't have a choice; you just need to take the money. But it's an interesting relationship that you have to build. And going back to if they're a little bit too involved, that can become maybe more negative. I think again, making sure that you have the boundaries right. talking to other companies that have worked with these investors before, understanding again what was the relationship like can help. And I think you see it right away if the investor asks some of the questions that you mentioned as well, like the things that you mentioned earlier, where it's like, how can I help you? It's you're the expert as a founder, but I would love to be able to help you. Let me know what you need from me. If they approach a relationship like this, usually you're good. If they're just right away in the meeting saying like, this is what I want you to do.
Yeah.
This is how I imagine the company to be. You guys should be there in 3 years. Then you know that the relationship might be, working in a different way.
Totally.
So I think just keeping that in mind might help mitigate the negative. But
no,
I mean,
100%. I appreciate that. Like those little nuances are quite important as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, you mentioned it because we are value-add investors at Tamar Capital. And you mentioned that this is also why we created Le Studio at the very beginning. But I think maybe we can get a little bit into this just because, that makes sense with the topic.
Yeah, and I'll make a small caveat about, I think, family offices first. So Tamar Capital, it's the investment entity that we work with and work for. We're a family office, which means that family offices usually are very value driven.
Yes.
They may be less specialized as like a biotech fund or something, but usually the background of the family is aligned to certain family businesses or depending on where the wealth has come from.
Yeah.
And in this regard, it's tied to sort of like energy, a lot of in the food distribution. So already we've been able to be a value-add investors for very specific opportunities like that, and we naturally gravitate to some of those because we know we can support. Then you have like specific team members that have expertise or like interests. We have a lot of engineers on the team. We have designers on the team. We have an impact lead on the team. And those are things that we're able to add. So I think one thing to note is like, we align very much the values that the family office embodies when we're making investments. And I think a lot of our founders see that and are very drawn to that. But we like to call that smart capital because we like to be very much like there for our founders in different capacities. I think, we've acted very much as sounding boards. We've like supported on different fronts. And then slowly came the studio. And basically the studio was really born out of, we were being pulled in very different directions, being asked to support, on different pieces. And we just found that, founders don't have time, and the support that you give them needs to be support that is left long-term outside of just direct advice. And so that's sort of where the studio was born from. I mean, like really Sophie and I put our heads together and we're like trying to think like, what's something that we can do to make sure that both we are offering support that's helpful, that's time efficient, and that really like is able to guide them and enable them. And so, I mean, with the middle, with the kind of expertise of the studio, within design, within impact, that sort of has been an extra value add.
I think that made a lot of sense. I think it was from the get-go. I mean, at Tamar Capital was very clear that we wanted to be active with the companies as well. So it made sense to have that like little entity to support it. But we've seen the results, I think. And as you said, like we even seen the relationships that we've built with most of our founders, which has been really nice. And you have to remember that from the investor side of things, we're investing. Obviously, we have our reasons as investors. We're looking for returns. Absolutely. We have our own strategy internally. Absolutely. But also like we want to help companies grow and we believe in the companies that we invest, and that, that's why the smart capital comes with, as you said, like alignment of values internally in the team, but also with the founders, because we love all of our founders and it's a little bit fluffy to say, but we want them to succeed, obviously as companies, but also as people. And I think that's been kind of the most interesting part for us.
Totally. And actually, I'll just allude to one last piece. I mean, that is worth noting. So the family office has origins in the Middle East and in Europe. And a lot of times, for example, we invest across different geographies. So we've done investments in the US, we've done investments in Europe and investments in Latin America. But like specifically, we're able to help companies that want to expand to different regions that want to expand to the Middle East and Europe because we have a network. So you can think of smart capital in so many different layers that have aligned very much to what Sophie said. And like, I love what you said about, we care about them from like a genuine like level. And that's sort of like, I'm not tooting our own horn, but that's sort of what you want because it just like, it just makes such a difference. And I think you're able to like have people that are in your court.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your corner for a long time. Again, like investment is not a kind of in and out situation. It can happen next week, but usually you have investors that come in the company for quite a long time. We're talking years, so you have to find the right partners. Anyway, I think we can kind of wrap it up around this.
Hopefully that's been informative. And of course, write in the comments section and we can come in and answer questions.
We love to talk about these topics. So we'll take all the questions. And then, tune in for the next Working Labs. We always, as we said, have a new topic and make sure that we can answer some of the questions that you send to us. And if you need any more information on us, where can they find us?
At lestudio.io. Also, we're on social media. Obviously, we have Instagram and LinkedIn and now YouTube and TikTok, all on lestudio.io. So make sure you go to all these platforms and find us and get more insights as we share kind of more about the ins and outs of entrepreneurship and any of the sort of feedback that we can.
Perfect.
And also you tell us the topics that you want us to talk about. So find us on our community on Slack. There's a link on our website that you can join from, and also just put it in the comments and we will happily target that. Thank you so much.